The two will be hosting an exclusive event next Saturday.
Rebrand was launched after, well, your story. You lost how much weight?
So 16 stone, which is over 220 pounds, which
wow.
I know is quite significant. But during that kind of decade-long journey, I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about what it takes to be successful, to be happy, to be well, and to just live an incredible life every day.
Are you giving them goals to work towards or helping them structure their life?
Yeah, so I don't give out goals, absolutely not. It's all about whatever an individual wants. So what we do to begin with is we understand, like, where are you now? Where are you thriving? Where do you feel really happy and excited in your life? And what's lacking? Like, where would you like to feel better? Where would you like to improve? And then we take it from there.
So I'd love to take that on board. I'd love to be my true self and fulfil my potential. So have you got any practical tips on how to do that?
Yeah, so we start with clarity, right? Like, you need to know, it's such a busy, fast-paced world we live in. There's so much sensory overload. You know, it'd be so easy to be distracted. So we need to kind of quiet all that noise down and start with, where do I want to focus? Pick 2 or 3 things. Where do I want to focus? And then we define the goal. What would I like that area of my life to look, not just look like, but feel like? And then we take it from there. So that's where you would start. I actually had a cancer diagnosis in 2019.
Oh.
And I just decided if I was going to be lucky enough to be on the other side of it, I wasn't going to play small anymore.
GB News, the people's...
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good morning and welcome to a Christmassy Camilla Tominey show on GB News. I hope you like the Christmas trees and the festive spirit on December the 1st. Well, what a week we've witnessed with the assisted dying vote and Labour's first cabinet resignation. Pat McFadden, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, will be joining me. I'm going to be asking him about the departure of Transport Secretary Louise Haigh. I'm also going to be speaking to Shadow Environment Secretary Victoria Atkins. She'll be live with me. I'll ask her about why she supported the assisted dying bill. Former Home Secretary Alan Johnson will be with me to talk about his new book on Harold Wilson. And, of course, I'll also be talking to him about what's been a tricky first few months for Labour in power. The pollster Scarlett Maguire will join me in the studio to reflect on the latest Ipsos poll that's found that Nigel Farage is the most popular politician in the UK today. And earlier on this week, I sat down with Sir Jacob and Lady Rees-Moggs ahead of their new reality programme, Meet the Moggs, being released tomorrow. Once again, we've got 90 minutes of punchy British politics ahead, so do not even think of going anywhere. But before all that, I'm joined by Aubrey Allegretti, Chief Political Correspondent at The Times, to go through the Sunday papers. Aubrey, lovely to see you. Let's talk about the assisted dying bill. Could the bill be killed? That's what The Sun is suggesting. Just explain what happens next with this legislation, which I personally think was rushed through on Friday. 5 hours of debate. I know there will be more debate, but when you compare it to, say, for instance, the debates around banning hunting, which I think racked up about 600 to 700 hours.
Hundreds of hours, exactly.
This seemed, I mean, what was the urgency? I don't quite understand. Oh, quick, we must do this now.
So, I sat through hours and hours of the debate, watching from the press gallery as MPs stood up one by one to either speak for or against the bill. And actually, there were a lot of MPs who said that they would vote for it, but reserved the right to vote against it further down the line. And what they really were trying to do was continue the debate. That's the way they put it. Now, the question of whether or not that debate is terribly substantive is one that we will see in the next few weeks. We anticipate that over the next 5 months, MPs will continue scrutinising this bill. So what will happen next is it goes to committee stage. Kim Ledbetter, the Labour MP behind this bill, will appoint up to 16 MPs to sit on that committee. And there were concerns that she would, if you like, sort of rig it, put lots of pro-assisted dying MPs on it. But she has committed that it will reflect roughly the result at second reading. So obviously there was a big majority for the pro-campaign, and so we expect there will be more of those sorts of people on the committee, but there will be some people who voted against it as well. And the government, meanwhile, which has sort of sat on the sidelines and had a period of enforced silence put on it by the Cabinet Secretary, will now conduct impact assessments. So we'll start to know a little bit more about what this means for the creaking court services and the very, very obviously difficult NHS, which people are already experiencing long waits for in the first place when they come to operations and to see a GP. So we're going to find out a little bit more about how this will interact with and make possibly worse those delays. We know that Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, and the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, voted against it, very opposed. How much are they going to get behind it? That's the sort of big question for the next few months.
Well, they may well share the public's fears, which are that the court service, which is already overburdened and plagued with delays, along with the NHS, waiting lists still at 7 to 8 million, won't be able to cope with this. I mean, we've got no idea how many people are going to opt for it on a sort of daily basis. Is it going to be one person, 12, 90, 200? This is why people are scratching their heads wondering why on earth there was this sense of urgency when we have been discussing this for years. Just can't quite understand why it's rushed through. Lord Sumption's written a quite compelling piece in the Sunday Times, basically making the point that, you know, yes, he can understand the arguments on both sides, but what's the word he used? He says that the legislation is over-engineered and coldly inhuman.
Yeah, I mean, and he says that as a former Justice of the Supreme Court, he sat on a case that discussed assisted dying. He did support a sort of change in the law, but he is discussing in the Sunday Times about why he doesn't feel any joy at the passing of it. He thinks it's unlikely that the principle of autonomy will stop where the bill leaves it, i.e. speaking to a concern that was raised by people like Danny Kruger, the Conservative MP, who basically said, you know, even if you pass this bill, the courts might then go on to decide, because somebody brings a complaint, that it breaches their human rights, and it widens the scope of it, i.e. the original intention of the bill. It doesn't stay there. And that has been seen in a few instances where other countries have passed this sort of legislation, certainly not all, but it is a concern that people like Lord Sumption have. And I think that it speaks to a fear that ultimately MPs have gone into this debate a bit blind. There hasn't been an impact assessment. There are lots of parts of the legislation which use the words by regulation, and what that effectively means is that ministers will go in and fill in the gaps. They will get to make the decision, and they won't need to use primary legislation to enact it.
Yeah, my alarm bell is ringing in my mind there, because, ministers filling in gaps in legislation is never a good move. Lord Sumption also makes the point that when it talks about 2 doctors signing off an assisted death and then it being assessed by a judge, to what extent will the judge assess it? Is the judge going to be assessing the circumstances of the patient's illness? Is the judge going to be assessing whether it fits the parameters of the legislation? It's all very murky, and that's why it should have taken more time before we got to this stage, I think, to debate it. But let's see, it's going to be a story that runs and runs over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. Now, slight change of tack here, but it is also an interesting investigation, this. Gregg Wallace. So there's a lot of coverage. This is initially a Telegraph investigation. They've followed up on it today. They've got people coming forward. But almost every newspaper, Aubrey, has got some tale or other from somebody saying, well, I flagged this to the BBC. Times Radio's Asma Mir has said, well, I flagged this. Sorry, she's left now, but she was there. We've got other commentators saying it. He's fought back, and he keeps on recording these social media videos saying that these are allegations that have been made by middle-class, middle-aged women. Not sure whether the class or indeed the age of the accusers is that relevant. But it once again begs the question, how many times does the BBC need to be informed of alleged wrongdoing before actually taking any action? This seems to have been going on now with complaints dating back more than a decade.
And I think what's interesting is obviously the complaints at least date back to 2017, 2019, and it seems as though people at sort of all tiers of the organisation were ringing alarm bells. It was not just people on the show.
Yes.
We're told that people, I think the head of the sort of non-scripted entertainment for the BBC sent an email several years ago saying his behaviour was unacceptable and can't continue.
Yes.
So if you've got really senior people ringing the alarm bell, I mean, how loud does it have to be before people start to take notice?
He is protesting his innocence, and he certainly does deserve a right of reply to these claims. We've also had, like, Rod Stewart's wife, Penny Lancaster, suggesting that he was you know, quite intimidating and bullying on the show when she was on it. But I just think it's the BBC element that's of interest, this idea that they're not quick enough to crack down on concerns and complaints that are raised and adequately investigate them back at the time that they're made. And that's probably the overriding feeling. I'm rushing through a little bit because I can see time ticking, and we definitely want to get to Pat McFadden because there's lots to ask him about. Quick word about Elon Musk potentially planning to change Farage's fortunes by giving, it's been rumoured, $100 million to reform. Is this right?
Well, I mean, we know that Nigel Farage and Elon Musk are certainly best buddies. They were propping up Donald Trump on the campaign trail over in the US, and Nigel Farage is seriously looking to make inroads after the really strong showing that Reform had at the last general election. We know in the run-up to next sort of spring, there are the council elections that are coming up. That's what Reform has really set its sights on. And it thinks that the Conservatives have sort of been left wanting by having a really elongated leadership contest. That means there's this vacuum that's been created where Nigel Farage has been able to soak up a lot of attention. Now, if Elon Musk gave this $100 million payment, which is described as an FU Starmer payment in the Sunday Times.
Subtle, yeah.
Yes. Then, you know, this obviously doesn't just pose a problem for Keir Starmer, it also poses quite a significant problem to the Conservative Party.
Massively.
They're going to have difficulties fundraising,
Yeah.
you know, showing that they are a serious party that can rebuild from their very historically low base.
Yes, I mean, they've professionalised the outfit. They had that press conference on Thursday that I was at. I'm going to be discussing this a bit later with Scarlett Maguire, the pollster, just because they are on the rise. Just before we came on air, press release landed in my inbox suggesting that Reform is now equal to, has gone beyond the Conservatives and is taking Labour on significantly in Wales. I think they're level pegging in their public support in Wales, just behind Plaid Cymru. So everything to play for, but that would be a considerable donation to the Reform coffers. Let's then get on to Louise Haigh then, so the former Transport Secretary. We've now got a whole analysis that I think Glenn Owen has done in the Mail on Sunday about how this came about. Just to contextualise, Haigh is on the Corbynista side of the party. She was one of those who nominated Jeremy Corbyn to be leader back in the day. She's a lefty. We know what she's said about renationalising the railways, and she was behind that hefty pay rise to rail workers, which, you know, was obviously music to the union's ears. She's gone. It was a Times investigation. She had this fraud conviction. She did tell Starmer at the time. That is not in doubt, and I'm saying that now before I speak to Mr McFadden. Starmer overlooks it and has her in the cabinet. Why? What's happened here, Aubrey, do you think? What's the story behind the headline here?
Well, it seems that Louise Haigh did declare the conviction in which she pleaded guilty to this count of frauds, and Keir Starmer ultimately decided several years later, when he became leader, that this was something that was forgivable, and he decided to put her in his shadow cabinet. Obviously, he has had to sort of tread a very difficult tightrope at times to satiate both the left and the right of the Labour Party. We always talk about that, yes.
Aubrey, I'm going to leave it because somebody in my ear is saying Pat McFadden is ready, so we'll go to him as early as we can because we've got a lot of questions to ask him. Aubrey, thank you very much indeed. Sorry to cut you short, but very quick break and then we'll be back with Pat McFadden, who is Keir Starmer's right-hand man, to ask him some very serious questions about Louise Haigh's departure, but also Labour's quite catastrophic first 4 months in office. Do not move a muscle.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
The Daily Mail now, Josh, and pub landlords have to worry about more than the optics when it comes to offensive banter,
Yeah,
it
this
seems.
is a really big story and important. Pub landlords could have to become banter cops to stop themselves being sued by staff offended by comments from customers under workers' rights reform. So, Labour, when they were part of their election process, they were like, we're going to reform workers' rights, and that all sounds good on paper, but there were issues in terms of how might it affect employees and fear from employees costing them more money. One of these things that they're sort of pushing through, though, is that in the Equality Act of 2010, part of the issue was that if you were offended at work or someone said something sexist or racist, something that affected you, the employer had to take some sort of, like, they had three chances to kind of take action.
Yeah.
Now, the employer should have taken action already. So employees can sue employers. Now, this has a big impact on us because we're comics and we perform in venues. And if some of the bar staff hear a joke that they don't like, then they can sue their employer, potentially, under this legislation.
So it's not punters?
Well, also, it could be like you're at a bar and some bloke is like, oh, I like that top, or whatever. That's not good behaviour. But the point is now that employee could sue their employer.
So, because, I mean, the sort of scenario I was imagining was that a barmaid was being maybe sexually harassed or
That's
something.
what they're focusing in this article, but other articles have gone down the free speech route.
OK.
And also venues and universities having lectures. We saw it at, in Edinburgh Fringe Festival and Sadowitz. He had a show cancelled not because of any punters, but because two of the 18-year-olds were working. They were upset by his
There was a
wedding.
bar in Brighton, wasn't there? There was a story we covered a few weeks ago. A bar in Brighton threw some people out because...
exactly. They had turfs on the...
turfs. Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm joined now by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden. Mr McFadden, I just want to play you a quote from Keir Starmer that comes from May 2022. This was the midst of the Partygate scandal. Just have a listen.
The value symbolised by the door of number 10 must be restored. The game is up. You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. Only then can the government function again. Only then can the rot be carved out. Only then can we restore the dignity of that great office and the democracy that it represents.
You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker, Mr McFadden. So can I ask, what on earth Keir Starmer, as a former Director of Public Prosecutions, was thinking in appointing a convicted fraudster to his cabinet?
Well, that quote that you played, I think, was probably in the middle of Partygate when the Prime Minister and indeed the Chancellor of the day were being fined at that time for things they did in office for breaking the law. What we've never said is that someone who has some past conviction which is now spent can never serve in Parliament. That's never been the case. Now, I don't know the exact conversations that took place last Thursday between Louise Haigh and Keir Starmer. The upshot is that she has resigned and we've got a new Transport Secretary. But the clip that you played me there was about law breaking while serving in office. And that's what he was talking about during that clip.
Well, if it's not a problem to have a lawbreaker serving in office, why has she had to resign? We understand from both her team and indeed Downing Street that Keir Starmer was aware of this conviction when she was appointed to Cabinet. So was it OK for Keir Starmer to know privately, but then problematic for people to know publicly that this had happened? What changed?
Well, as I say, I'm not party to the conversations that took place last Thursday between Louise Haigh and the Prime Minister when this story came to light. There may have been some new information there, I don't know. But the result of that was that Louise Haigh decided to resign late on Thursday night. She said in her resignation letter she didn't want this to go on and be a long drawn out saga, a distraction for the government, as she put it. And I think that's quite a contrast between the way this was dealt with and the way some of these things have been dealt with in the past, where they have dragged out, they have become a big distraction. But here we are a couple of days on from it. She has resigned. I'm sorry to see her go. Louise Haigh was a good colleague, but we have a new Transport Secretary in place now, Heidi Alexander, who I think will do a really good job.
But this suggests that this has only happened, that her resignation and conversations have only taken place because the story ended up in the media. So what it speaks to is this idea that the Prime Minister has one set of morals which he puts on display publicly, but privately a whole different set of values. And we saw this with Donagate, didn't we? This sort of idea of Keir Starmer on one hand being morally upstanding, criticising Boris Johnson and others for impropriety in office, while secretly taking donations from Lord Ali, making sure that Sue Gray had sorted him out with a Downing Street pass. So it's one thing in public and another thing in private. In what world does this make you any different from the past Conservative administration that you spent months and years criticising?
I think the equivalence you're drawing there doesn't stack up at all. The previous Conservative administration were breaking the rules in Parliament to defend somebody who'd been guilty of breaking the lobbying rules. They wasted billions on COVID fraud and waste, and they organised a series of parties while telling the rest of the country they had to stay indoors and live a very strict lifestyle at the time.
Didn't.
So I don't accept there's equivalence between these things. And when you look, as I say, at the speed with which this was dealt with on Thursday compared to all the inquiries and everything that we had to have with some of those past things, it's much faster. It shows that he wants to act on these things.
Act on his own mistakes?
When they come to light.
Why did he appoint a convicted fraudster to Cabinet? Why did he do that? He's a former Director of Public Prosecutions.
Look, I'm not party to everything that's been disclosed at every stage of this. I don't think this is just a matter, as you put it a wee minute ago, of it becoming something in the press. But whatever the conversations have been, however the information has come out, in the end, she's resigned now. We've got a new Transport Secretary, and we'll carry on with the transport agenda.
But this is the other thing. OK, you don't know why he decided to promote a convicted fraudster to Cabinet. Fair enough. But a convicted fraudster was promoted to Cabinet without the public being told. How on earth can this be presented as more honest and decent politics? He stood on the steps of Downing Street promising change, promising a higher moral tone. He's promoted a convicted fraudster to Cabinet and not told the public. The public's only found out thanks to The Times and Sky News.
Well, look, as I say, I don't know exactly what was disclosed at every stage of this, so I'm not sure.
Nothing was disclosed to the public. The public found out this week.
The upshot is she's resigned.
Right.
Yes, the public found out this week, but what I'm saying is before that, I don't know what was disclosed at every stage of this. The important thing is we have a new Transport Secretary in place. OK, look, let's look at Labour's record in office so far. We've got removing pensioners' winter fuel allowance whilst giving train drivers 15%. We now find out that the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall's been claiming 350 quid a month in energy costs for her Leicestershire home. Presumably a lot of you are doing that. We'll have to consider the morality of that itself. We've had Donagate, we've had Rosie Duffield resigning, we've had the Chagos Islands handed back to Mauritius and huge controversy. We've had Sue Gray, Chief of Staff, resigning after it was revealed that she had given donor Lord Ali a pass to Downing Street. We've had the employers' NIC contributions increased, a broken manifesto promise if ever there was one. We've had suggestions that the Chancellor has lied on her CV. We've had IHT applied to farmers and a massive protest in Parliament. And now we've had Louise Haigh's resignation. Can we be honest, Mr McFadden? You've been in politics a long, long time. This has been an absolutely disastrous start to the Labour administration, hasn't it? Not at all. We've had a good increase in the minimum
Mr.
wage.
McFadden.
We've had more help for carers. We've had a freeze in the fuel duty. We've protected the pay slips of people as we said we would in our manifesto. We've had a lot to sort out. You're right. Had to sort out a collapsing prison system. We're having to start to get the NHS waiting list down. We've got legislation going through on transport that we talked about earlier. We've got a big agenda, and this week we're going to take that forward with a new plan for change, setting out key priorities in health, in education, in living standards, in energy, in safety on our streets, so that the public know exactly what the priorities are after the big budget that we had just a few weeks ago. That's going to be a good plan for the country. It's also going to change the way that the state works, because we've got to be doing that too, so that we get value for money and deliver for the British public.
But Mr. McFadden, you've mentioned there huge waiting lists in the NHS. You've said that the police system is broken. We've heard in the past your rhetoric around the prison service being broken as well. And in your infinite wisdom, you decide that this is a good time to legalise assisted dying, with all those different institutions on their knees.
Well, this was a private member's bill brought forward, and I think we should treat this very seriously. You know, I was there in the vote on Friday. I saw how seriously people were taking this, whether they were for it or against it. There has been a debate going on about this in the country for some years. It was brought forward through a private member's bill. Now that Parliament's voted on that on Friday, it will go into committee. It will be considered in much more detail now, like every other piece of legislation, and it should be, because it's such a serious issue. And the House of Commons will have to vote on it again in a few months' time. So this bill, this big and serious measure, will be properly and fully considered clause by clause now, as it should be. And even though we had the vote on Friday, I still think there's probably a long way to go before this becomes law.
Well, one wonders why it had to be so rushed through. This has been something that's been debated for years and years and years. Comparatively, Parliament spent 700 hours discussing and debating banning hunting with dogs. We've got assisted dying now set to be legalised on the basis of 5 hours of debate. Even if you look over to Australia, where there are comparatively far, far fewer MPs, they debated assisted dying through the night for more than a week. What was the urgency here?
Well, it won't just be 5 hours, because it now goes into committee for 4 months, where it will be considered clause by clause, as it should be for a measure like this. Parliament will vote again and debate it again after that period, probably May or June next year, something around that time, and then it will all have to be done again in the House of Lords. So it won't be rushed, it will be fully and properly considered. And as I say, even though the House of Commons voted for it on Friday, I still think the bill's got a lot of parliamentary stages and a lot of things to consider before it fully becomes law.
All right. Mr. McFadden, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Really grateful for you coming on. Well, coming up next, thank you. Coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to the Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Victoria Atkins. Are the Tories doing enough to ward off the threat from reform? This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Don't go anywhere.
It's the biggest, greatest Great British giveaway so far, with your chance to win a spectacular £50,000 in tax-free cash. 2025 could be amazing, with plenty of treats, holidays and fun on the horizon. How would you enjoy that cash? £50,000 will make someone our biggest ever winner. For your chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5. £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
Maria, potholes, the bane of everybody that uses the road, whether you're a car driver or a cyclist. As a cyclist, are even worse. How have we got into this situation where our roads are in such a bad state?
Well, part of it is to do with actually our climate. In somewhere like, say, Sweden, like the snow will fall on the ground, it will stay there for months. Whereas here we've got what's called a freeze-thaw climate, where the water comes down, then we might have a cold snap and it freezes, and the water within the pothole will then expand and make the pothole bigger. Then we might have a mild spell, and then that process repeats. So, we do actually need extra funding to acknowledge the fact that, we just live in a climate where we're sort of particularly vulnerable to potholes.
Why? I mean, the fact that this happens, these weather conditions happen, is no great surprise to anybody. Why has the problem been ignored for so long?
I think what's happened is we've had short-term funding. So it's like, oh, there's a pothole, let's patch it up. Oh, there's another one, let's patch it up. But the patches aren't actually really that strong, so then they break down again. So, really what we need is to have roads completely resurfaced, and then they'll just be pothole-free for a very long time. And that really is how funding should be. That's the direction funding should go in, as opposed to just sort of dribs and drabs here and there.
Do you think this government are going to be good for the motorist, or is there indeed a war on the motorist still?
The different parties come in and they've all got different policies that they wheel out, then they cancel the policies, and then there's so much lack of transparency. Like, for example, with the pothole issue, sometimes the government, whichever government is in office, will do some big showboating about how they're going to give X amount of potholes, and you still think that sounds really good.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. More still to come, including Shadow Environment Secretary Victoria Atkins, former Labour bigwig Alan Johnson and pollster Scarlett Maguire, and the Rees-Moggs. All of that to come after your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Camilla, thank you. The top stories. Well, Gregg Wallace has responded to the mounting allegations against him in a defiant video posted online, saying the accusations come from middle-class women of a certain age. Wallace, who stepped back from presenting the BBC cooking show MasterChef after accusations he made sexual comments towards staff and celebrity guests on a range of programmes over 17 years, says he worked with more than 4,000 contestants over the years of all different ages, background and walks of life. The BBC is facing fresh questions over its handling of allegations against him after emails emerged showing it was warned about him in 2017. According to the Sunday Times, the broadcaster Asma Mir complained about inappropriate comments he'd allegedly made during filming of Celebrity MasterChef. Wallace's lawyers strongly deny he engaged in sexually harassing behaviour, while the BBC says it will always listen if people want to make us aware of something directly.
In the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age, just from Celebrity MasterChef.
In other news, the Prime Minister says a new phase for his government will begin this week under what he calls a plan for change for Britain. Sir Keir Starmer is set to announce he'll reform the public sector and overhaul Whitehall when he makes a major speech marking the next phase of government. The Prime Minister will announce the markers for his so-called missions that Number 10 says will allow the public to hold Sir Keir and his team to account on their manifesto promises. It's been suggested these moves will influence decisions for next year's spending review. And Cabinet Minister Liz Kendall has been branded a hypocrite for removing winter fuel payments for 10 million pensioners while bills at her second home are being met from the public purse. The Work and Pensions Secretary says she's allowed to claim costs for the second property in her Leicester West constituency. The most recent documents revealed taxpayers covered just under £4,000 in energy costs, as over 100,000 pensioners will be forced into poverty. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. It is back to Camilla.
Thank you, Tatiana. Lots more still to come on the Camilla Tominey Show today, including Alan Johnson, former Home Secretary and Health Secretary, talking about his book about Harold Wilson. I'll also be speaking to the pollster Scarlett Maguire. She belongs to the firm that was the only one to predict Trump's victory in the US. I'll be speaking to her about the rise of reform. And earlier this week, I sat down with Sir Jacob and Lady Rees-Moggs, Jacob and Helena, to their friends, ahead of their new reality TV show being released tomorrow. But first, I'm delighted to be joined now by the Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Victoria Atkins. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good morning.
Now, you supported the assisted dying bill.
Thank you so much.
Were you confident that that bill had enough debate time? 5 hours? I made the point earlier that Parliament spent over 600 hours debating banning fox hunting. 5 hours on such a monumental decision?
Well, thank you, Camilla. And for me personally, I appreciate this is a very delicate subject and there'll be a range of views on this. But for me personally, I had not only listened to the debate on Friday, but actually had years of conversations with constituents about this very delicate matter. I read all of my correspondence that I was sent ahead of the debate on Friday, and I listened to some of the debate as well before arriving at the conclusion that I did, which was to vote for the bill, actually because I want the debate to continue. You know, this is the first stage of this bill process. There'll be a lot of scrutiny, and there are some, you know, real questions I think that those who support the bill must answer, including, as I've said from my constituents, the concerns about the Canadian model and so on. And through that scrutiny, we will see if those questions can be answered to adequately and well enough such that the bill will receive the support of MPs like me at third reading. But there's a long process to go before we reach that stage.
It's been suggested that there is something quite unconservative about supporting this bill, because I suppose by its very definition, the Conservative Party is for conservation, and that should presumably include preserving life. Are you struggling to hear me, Miss Atkins? Oh, I think we've lost Victoria Atkins. I think she's struggling to hear us. Let's see if we can get her back on audio so she can hear me clearly. I'm hoping you might be able to hear Aubrey Allegretti, who's still in the studio with me, just to discuss Victoria Atkins there. Is there something fundamentally unconservative about supporting assisted dying? Not least when it's been tabled by Kim Leadbeater. She's obviously an opposition MP. We know it's got Starmer's support. Should the opposition be opposing for opposing's sake?
It is interesting because obviously this did cut down Conservative lines as well as Labour lines, so it's not clear-cut for either party. But if you were going to pick any MP to try and propose a piece of cross-party legislation, Kim Leadbeater's about as close as you could get to somebody that's sort of well-respected across the House. And Danny Kruger, the Conservative MP who spoke against it immediately after her, did reference that in his speech as well. Conservatives are obviously weighing the sort of right to conservation against the right to, you know, to liberty and for people to choose themselves.
Do we think we've got Victoria Atkins back? Yes, let's see. Victoria Atkins, hopefully you can hear me again. Sorry, we're battling a little bit with the audio. Well, I was just talking there to Aubrey Allegretti. Is there something slightly anti-Conservative about supporting this bill? You know, the Conservatives are meant to conserve things, including life.
Yeah, look, I actually think this is a subject that certainly the public believe, and I have to say I agree with them. I think, you know, party lines on this or party political boundaries don't apply in this really important issue. I think we saw across the House from both those who voted aye, but also those who voted no, there was, for example, a real wish to see conversations about palliative care and the quality of palliative care continue. I think we also saw many heartbreaking examples And there'll be, viewers at home that have been personally affected by this, where they just want to see whether the law can get into a better place than it is at the moment. And that's why I voted, as I say, it was because I want this debate to continue. I was worried that and this is just my view, as I say, I'm not for a moment judging anyone else, but I wanted to be able to let the debate continue. And we will have that debate, and we'll see what happens through scrutiny and see what happens at third reading. But I think the fact that we're now having this conversation is actually really important. And I wish that it wouldn't take just a piece of legislation for us to be able to have this conversation as a country in the longer term.
One more question on it before we move on. The historian Tom Holland posted this on X, and I thought it was quite a wise observation. He's obviously being quite tongue-in-cheek, but he said, "It's lucky we have a famously competent state, a well-funded health service, and courts with plenty of times on their hands, or I'd be worrying that this assisted dying / suicide is a terrible decision." He makes quite a good point, Miss Atkins, and I'll ask you this as a former lawyer as well. You're familiar with how overburdened the court system is alone. How are they going to cope with this new legislation?
Well, if I may, I think that's why I was disappointed and concerned, actually, when the Health Secretary and the Justice Secretary set out their views so strongly, because I was, I'm former Health Secretary. I was asked this question about assisted dying when I did media rounds in the past, and I was very careful to not express my own position in those interviews, precisely because I was aware that whatever Parliament decides, whether it is to maintain the status quo or to effect change, then of course the Health Secretary and the Justice Secretary have to be trusted across the board to ensure that the will of Parliament and the public is answered and met. So what I hope we'll see now is the government, although it continues to be neutral, and I fully accept that, they have got to provide Parliament with some of the answers about resourcing, for example, about ensuring that the protocols and the systems within the health service can be set up. I have to say, my observation as a former health secretary is that the health service has a budget nearly as large as the entire economy of Greece. It is the third largest employer in the world, and we should surely, as a country, be able to use that expertise and experience that are in those amazing workforce to be able to come up with this system if that is what Parliament decides. So, in a way, the resource argument, important though it is, I do think we need to look at the principles behind this and whether we are prepared as a society to cross that moral Rubicon, which I know many people have very strong views about.
OK, let's just move on to a story in the front of the Mail on Sunday today about Liz Kendall, who's the Work and Pensions Secretary. It's saying that it's hypocritical for Labour to be stripping pensioners of their winter fuel allowance while claiming back from the taxpayer the cost of energy bills at their second homes. Now, I appreciate that all MPs are entitled to do this, and that's been a standard convention for some time. Nigel Farage, however, has said, in light of what's happened to pensioners' winter fuel, that as an MP, he won't be claiming any money back from the taxpayer for fuel bills at his second home near Clacton. Is that something that you think the Tories should emulate? Because I looked at that this morning and I thought that's quite a strong attack line. Once again, we're getting Reform positioning itself as the main opposition here and not the Tories.
Oh, I don't think that's the case at all. Sadly, the Reform Party had the impact that we have lost many excellent, hard-working Conservative MPs from this Parliament, which means that we have this Labour supermajority. So my message to voters loud and clear is if you're as sick of this government as I already am, then please help us as Conservatives defeat them at the next election. But if I may just go on this broader theme of hypocrisy of this government, my goodness me, there's a lot to go on, isn't there? We've had the front page today, as you say, of a government that is removing this allowance from vulnerable pensioners who may be on an income of 13,000 or 14,000. They are expecting them to stump up the money for that. We know that's going to have a very real impact on some of our most vulnerable pensioners, but also the hypocrisy about the family farm tax.
But do you claim for fuel? Do you claim back for fuel?
We are forcing. I'm sorry, if I may, just on the family farm tax, I am...
No, quickly on this, because we're running out of time.
The family farm tax, All right, I do want to talk about the family farm tax, if I may. So we are forcing Labour into the chamber on Wednesday, to get them to decide whether they are going to back our British farmers or suck up to Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in terms of the family farm tax. In terms of allowances,
on energy bills,
I haven't historically claimed for it.
Should MPs claim for it?
Historically claimed for it.
You haven't historically, but would you recommend that your colleagues, if you're going to start attacking Labour on winter fuel, answer me this question just to conclude, shouldn't all MPs, if they're stripping pensioners of their winter fuel, just say, we won't claim back any of our energy costs at all?
So I think the much more effective way to fight this policy, rather than allowing a minority party leader to make these claims, is to work as an effective opposition to this Labour government and draw out all of the problems with their budget. They have a problem with the massive hike in national insurance that they are putting on employers. That's going to have a huge impact across the board, including with job losses. We should look at the family farm tax, the hypocrisy of the reports this weekend in the papers of a Labour MP's own family arranging their affairs in such a way just ahead of the budget so that we believe they won't be eligible, they won't have to pay this inheritance tax on their own family estates. The hypocrisy of assuming other people will pay for their clothes, as we saw with the cash for pants scandal over the summer. That's how we hold this government to account. And I'm not really interested in headlines by another one of your co-presenters, Camilla, to be honest.
Yeah, but my main central question is this. Conservative politicians cannot possibly accuse Labour politicians of hypocrisy in claiming back money from the taxpayer for fuel at second homes while stripping pensioners of their winter fuel allowance. So I'm saying to you, your colleagues should follow Farage's example and your own and not claim back any energy bills.
I'm sorry, no Conservative will ever follow Mr Farage. The fact is that the reason this is in the news is because of Labour's decision to remove winter fuel payments from pensioners. That is the mischief. That's what we are all trying to get Labour to reconsider on. And that's why we forced the vote on Labour MPs. So it's that hypocrisy that we are focused on. And I'm not, as I say, I'm afraid I'm not going to take Mr Farage's lead in anything.
Fine. Forget Farage. I'm asking you this question. Should MPs claim back money from the taxpayer for their fuel bills, yes or no?
I think, so in answer to this,
yes or no?
It's not for me to decide how...
Yes or no?
No, Camilla, forgive me, I'm not accepting the premise of the question. It is for individual MPs to decide their expenses claims, what they're prepared to claim for. What I will say, however, is that we as Conservatives are the effective opposition to this budget of broken promises, and we are working very, very hard to hold this government to account, but we need people to join us so that we can hold them to account and I hope beat them at the next election. That's how we get this back. That's how we correct this terrible circumstance of this Labour government.
Victoria Atkins, thank you very much. I know you've been battling with some sound issues, so I thank you for your patience. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up, I'm going to be speaking to former Home Secretary under Tony Blair, Alan Johnson. He's got a new book out on Harold Wilson. I'll be asking him also to give his verdict on this Labour government. Back in a jiffy.
There we go. Brilliant.
Do not move a muscle.
We're right across. I'll deal with that. Thank you.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Cryptocurrency entrepreneur Justin's son spent $6.2 million, £4.9 million, on a banana. Duct taped to a wall, a piece of art by artist Mauricio Catalan. Other artwork has recently caused controversy. A portrait of the British computer scientist Alan Turing by the world's first ultra-realistic robot artist, that is to say, ADAR, sold at auction for almost $1.1 million. Joining me now to talk about these latest hoo-has is art critic and mentor at the University of Arts London, Estelle Lovett. I have a feeling that in the case of the banana, it's quite a lot to do with the buyer. Now, you've researched the buyer a little bit. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Justin's son?
Yes, so he's a very wealthy cryptocurrency dealer. And of course, you know, everything now is AI and FTs, and it's the way that money's going, and it's very good publicity for him. So obviously, you know, he's not daft. But what makes this banana so unusual is, and it has, as you say, taken the art world by storm. It is the current spectacle, and what's amazing is that even during these very difficult times, the art market still manages to spend big on a significant fuss. Why has it created this fuss? Well, don't forget, the winning bid just happened in a matter of minutes. It took Justin Sun minutes to beat 6 other rivals, so they've all got mega bucks in their pocket. But you know, it's conceptual art at its best.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm joined now by Alan Johnson, former Home Secretary and Health Secretary under the last Labour government, who has written a fascinating new book about Harold Wilson. Alan, lovely to see you on this Sunday morning.
Hi, Camilla.
Now, you've said of Wilson, let me just quote, "I believe that Harold Wilson, son of an industrial chemist and born near Huddersfield, was the greatest Prime Minister in this country's history." Why do you say that, Alan? That's quite a claim.
Did I say that?
You did say that. You said because of his unknown intellect and extraordinary achievements.
Yeah. I thought I was asked to name the greatest Labour Prime Minister. But, you know, I defend Harold, particularly after writing the book, because I wasn't aware, and I know, Camilla, you've read the book recently, because we talked about it when we were together on Wednesday. It's a short read. It's 30,000 words. That's what I was commissioned for. And when you distill and précis Wilson's career into 30,000 words, you realise just how amazingly successful he was. In terms of his record in government, you just have to look at those huge advances in the 1960s, not just the legalisation of homosexuality. Alan Turing, the great war hero, was chemically castrated by the state for being homosexual just 13 years before Wilson changed the law. Not just about decriminalising abortion, not just the first Race Relations Act to protect ethnic minorities against the terrible prejudice that they experienced, just a small change to the divorce laws. So many people, mainly women, trapped in unhappy marriages because it virtually took a court case to actually change the situation. You virtually had to prove unfaithfulness or whatever. And he introduced the concept of irretrievable breakdown. And those and a whole series of other measures. I mean, I could argue, this is not, seeing as you put that tantalising prospect forward, Churchill was a great prime minister, and he was the perfect prime minister for the war. You have to search to find out anything Churchill did on the domestic front that's even remotely comparable to Wilson, because basically Churchill left that to others. He left education to Butler. So in
Alan,
terms
you
of,
could say he was quite busy. You know, he didn't have the luxury in office of not having to take on Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. On the other hand, with Harold Wilson, he's an intriguing figure, isn't he? Because the left don't seem to want to laud him as they have somebody like Clement Attlee. And second of all, you describe him as this great moderniser, very progressive in his thinking and his politics. And yet there's a contradiction there because he's pipe smoking, he's a traditionalist, he famously got on very well with the late Queen Elizabeth II. Why don't the left celebrate Wilson more?
A very good question. Why don't we all celebrate Wilson more? I mean, he ended his period in office. He'd won 4 elections, only matched by Gladstone. He'd won a European referendum, the first plebiscite we'd ever had in this country, not matched by David Cameron. But he left under this cloud, which was partly about something called the Lavender List and his relationship with Marcia Williams, his political secretary, but also because he had a reputation of being slippery. And if you think about that European debate, he upset the left because there was a clear Labour conference decision, 10-1, to just pull out of Europe if we won the 74 election. And on the right, Roy Jenkins, Tony Crosland, etc., said, why are you withdrawing from Europe? We're members now. You applied to be a member in the 60s when de Gaulle famously said no. So he upset the left and the right and knew that's what he'd do through the referendum. And that's just an example of Wilson's mastery of the political skills that got the country into the right place, I would argue, but left plenty of enemies on left and right, not just his political enemies in the House of Commons, but within the Labour Party.
All right. So we've discussed Wilson's genius, and you, of course, are closely associated with both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. How do you think, Alan, the current Labour Prime Minister is shaping up against his predecessors? It hasn't been the easiest 4 months for Keir Starmer. I think that much we must admit. Pat McFadden didn't want to admit it earlier on the show, but can you and I agree on that?
Yeah, it's not been a brilliant start, but I'll judge Keir Starmer after at least 4 years, maybe 5. I'm pleased that money's going into health, and I'm pleased that money's going into education. I'm pleased that they're closing off a tax loophole, let's face it, where bankers could buy land to escape inheritance tax. I'm pleased about. I don't think I should be getting the winter fuel allowance. I don't think Nigel Farage should. I think a payment for 80, it's supposed to be a measure to counter poverty. 80% of recipients are nowhere near being in poverty, and they're getting a lump of taxpayers' money. The context of it was strange because it appeared from nowhere, and I think some of those problems that Keir Starmer and the new government have faced are about that. They seem pretty strange decisions and they surprised people, and there's been a kind of difficulty in putting those arguments across.
Just to push back on a couple of those points, you could argue in the case of farmers that actually it's going to affect farmers with far less wealth in assets than had been intended. And on the winter fuel allowance, you could say, well, hang on a minute, it might be affecting pensioners like, for instance, Nigel Farage, who I think is younger than you're giving him credit for, Alan, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe.
But,
maybe.
It may be affecting pensioners on 14 grand a year. That isn't somebody who has got a lot of spare cash. But moving on from your point, why has this all gone wrong? You're saying some good ideas but bad execution. Is Starmer just not a very good politician? I see his approval rating, as you mentioned, the Reform leader there. It's dipped and dipped and dipped since he took office. Farage is now more popular than the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think what most people feel is it's better than what went before. That landslide election victory for Labour didn't come out of nowhere. It came out after 14 years of the most disastrous, incompetent governments anyone in this country has ever seen. Now, in terms of your fundamental question, there are always arguments for and against. Of course there are. The winter fuel allowance, I was in Department for Work and Pensions when we introduced pension credit 4 years after the winter fuel allowance. But pension credit was about tackling poverty. The winter fuel allowance was a very temporary arrangement. But there are no easy decisions in politics. If you come into government with the economy in such a mess, you have to make decisions that are going to hurt people. And in opposition, I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday in Hull. In opposition, we love to say, we're not frightened of taking hard decisions. And then as soon as you take a hard decision, you start to run away from it and not defend that decision. I think the decision on inheritance tax was tough. There'll be Farmers who'll be adversely affected by that, yes. I think the decision on winter fuel allowance was tough. I think there will be pensioners who will feel that, although the increase in people claiming pension credit is absolutely very, that will deal with pensioner poverty, not the winter fuel allowance. But in all these cases, there are no easy options. That's what being in government is about. And lots of my colleagues on the Labour benches quite enjoyed opposition because you just blame the government for everything. Now they're finding after 13 years just how tough government is, particularly to bring about the changes that Labour are looking to bring about, to properly fund our public services, to ensure that we get people back into work. All of that is going to be tough, and there's no easy decisions there.
All right. Alan Johnson, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Your book on Harold Wilson is out now. Thank you very much for appearing on GB News. Good to see you. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to the pollster Scarlett Maguire. We're going to discuss whether Reform are taking on the Tories and in Labour, particularly in Wales. Have a chat about the US election as well and what that means for Donald Trump's second presidency. And we've got an interview with the Rees-Moggs to come too. So lots more to look forward to on the Camilla Tominey Show this morning. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, good morning. Here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We'll see quite a showery day across the UK today, quite breezy too, but temperatures well above the seasonal average. Low pressure's anchored towards the northwest of the UK at the moment, and that's feeding these bands of rain in from the west. Quite a cloudy picture on the whole across the UK today. Those bands of showers working their way east across most areas, interspersed by some bright or sunny spells. And the brisk winds we've seen, especially towards the north and northwest, gradually easing as we go through the day. Staying fairly blustery though, and pretty mild for the time of year too. Temperatures in the low to mid-teens Celsius, peaking at 14, perhaps even locally 15 Celsius down towards the south. 15 is 59 in Fahrenheit. As we go through the evening into the overnight period on Sunday, further bands of showers will work in from the west. We'll just start to see some cooler weather tucking in towards the far north of Scotland. So to end the day on Sunday, it's quite a showery picture here. Some of those showers on the heavy side, but notice temperatures holding up at 9 or 10 degrees, so still fairly mild. There'll be some clear spells across Northern Ireland, showers mainly out towards the west here. Whereas across Wales, a very showery end to the day. Again, some of those showers on the heavy side. Elsewhere across the south and southeast, a mixture of clear spells and some showers. And once again, fairly mild for the time of year. So as we go through the evening into the overnight period, those bands of showers continue their way eastwards across all areas, and we do start to see some colder air just tucking into the far north, so the showers across the high ground in Scotland starting to turn wintry by Monday morning. Could see a touch of frost here by Monday morning too, but elsewhere temperatures holding up at 8 to 10 Celsius, so once again a pretty mild night for the time of year. As for Monday itself, the colder air across Scotland starts to make inroads further south, reaching northern England and parts of Northern Ireland through the day. Again, the showers turning increasingly wintry, particularly on the hills of Scotland, whereas across England and Wales, it's more a case of outbreaks of rain working their way in from the north at times, and staying quite mild here, with temperatures generally still close to double figures. Temperatures peaking then in the south at around about 9, 10, locally even 11 Celsius. 11 is 52 in Fahrenheit.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Pollster extraordinaire Scarlett Maguire is in the studio. I describe you as that because your company, JL Partners, were the only ones to closely predict the Trump victory. So well done to you, because most of the US pollsters were way off.
Yeah, that's
Little
right.
UK firm gets it right.
Yeah, it's good fun.
So well done you. We'll get on to American matters in just a moment. I'm intrigued by this Ipsos poll. I know it's a rival. You will have done your own polling, but about approval ratings of party leaders. And we've got Farage now, apparently more popular than the PM, Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey. Reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've seen in our own polling as well. And there's sort of two ways that you can look at popularity. You can look at net popularity, so the balance of how many people like them compared to how many people dislike them, in which case Farage is ahead of Starmer. In fact, every politician we tested is ahead of Starmer currently, but still behind the likes of Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey. But I think that's more because the public don't know them yet. Because you have many more people answering don't know. But if you look at just how many people like them, then yes, that is correct. More people like Farage.
I mean, it's harsh to kind of make the comparison to Badenoch at this stage because she's untried and untested, but she needs to get in a hurry to get more recognition and more kind of profile, because you've got Farage there. He just surpassed the 2 million followers on TikTok mark. He's instantly recognisable. Obviously has this channel as a platform, etc., etc. Just moving on to reform, purely because I was at their press conference on Thursday and I wrote my column about it in the Telegraph yesterday. You know, they are on the rise. You've got the situation. Have I extrapolated this data correctly? I hope so, because we put it in print. You know, there was a compendium of all of the council by-elections that have happened since the general election. And that does seem to suggest that support for Labour, so I think Labour about 10% down, Conservatives are flatlined, Lib Dems have gained like 1%, Greens have gone down, maybe the Greens went to the Lib Dems. Seems to me that Labour support is shifting to reform. Have I analysed that correctly?
So, yes, but the council by-elections are an interesting case. If you had a Labour person here talking, they'd be saying we're not worried about council by-elections. Hardly anyone votes in them. They're very low turnout and they're a very different sort of electorate. And, crucially, they're not voting on who occupies number 10. I think with that caveat, though, it has been very interesting to see that reform look like they have been making gains. Labour has definitely been doing very badly in these council by-elections, which is quite striking for a government that is so new into office and elected on such a big landslide. But I think what they point to, which will be much more interesting, is the local elections in May, which I think are a huge test for Labour, but actually probably more importantly for reform.
Yes, because he's been saying that he wants to emulate Paddy Ashdown, have this situation where reform is both professionalised but has as many local branches as they can get. They're saying that they want to build grassroots into a local political movement, then into a national political movement. So he has said that they need to be winning hundreds of seats come May. At this stage, appreciate it's early days, although time is ticking. We now have a Christmas tree in the studio. What are the chances of reform performing that well in May next year?
So I don't know about reform's internal operations, and that will be absolutely crucial when it comes to the May elections. Obviously, they say they're working on building that up so that they have the sort of activists on the grounds and the methods they need to be able to get out that vote. But putting that to the side, I think one thing you can say, whether reform are able to meet this, the public opinion is ripe for a sort of reform challenge. So an anti-establishment, anti-politics challenge to the mainstream parties. That's what the electorate is currently looking for. Whether reform can meet them in the locals, that's a question that we'll see in May, but the conditions are certainly right for it.
Do you agree with John Curtis, the polling professor, who has suggested that we are in the grip of Britain's two largest parties on the affections of the electorate, never looking weaker? He's basically saying that because so many people didn't vote for Labour and, in fact, put their vote elsewhere, in fact, 42% of the electorate voted for someone other than the Labour Party, that we're now looking at a situation where that two-party system seems to be kaput. I mentioned earlier, Reform press release comes in suggesting that now they're level pegging with Labour in Wales against Plaid Cymru. Which is interesting, isn't it? They've overtaken the Tories in Wales.
Oh, I think Wales will actually be a hugely... There was a great piece in The Spectator this week about the reform threat to both Labour and actually the Conservative standing, what they have of it in Wales. And I think Wales is a really interesting testing ground for reform. They came second in the general election, even just passed. And I really think they could build on that success, especially in Labour's deindustrialised heartlands. But I think to the point more generally about the two-party system, that's actually something that I've been thinking, not even just now, but during the election campaign itself. herself. The result, I think, validated that. Only 2 in 10 of the eligible electorate voted for Labour because turnout was so low, and they only won 33% of the sort of 60% turnout. So you're looking at a system where there was no enthusiasm for the main parties. It was very clear, and when you asked people, both in focus groups and in polls, they were voting for change.
Yes.
If people don't feel like they're getting that change, then the obvious answer is to look outside those mainstream parties. And I think we're looking at an electorate that looks much more sort of European and what we've been seeing happening in Europe, but that is currently constrained by first past the post.
Yes.
But I have a feeling we'll see that sort of disintegrate by the time it gets to the next election, and those sort of barriers and the guardrails that first past the post puts in place against these sort of anti-establishment or third-party threats, I think will come through, especially if we're looking at a situation that we've seen over the last few weeks where no party is polling above 30%.
It's intriguing, isn't it, for the Labour Party to have such a big majority on the back of such a loveless landslide. Let's move over to America. I mean, what lessons can we learn from what happened with the recent election on November the 5th? Why did the Democrats lose so badly, do you think, Scarlett?
I think the first thing is to say is about Joe Biden. He was a terrible candidate for re-election and should not have stayed on the ticket as long as he did. That did a huge amount of damage to the Democrats standing with their own voters as well as with independent voters and with everyone else. And so I think it was always going to be a very difficult job for someone else to take over. I think there was quite a lot of artificial optimism from the Democrats after that happened because they had they thought they had a candidate that could string a sentence together. Actually, that didn't turn out to be the case either. And I think Harris was a bad candidate. The issues were working against them. People have been reacting against incumbents across the globe, but in America they were particularly cross about inflation, the cost of living and immigration. And they judged the Democrats poorly on that record. And so I think when you put those things together, in hindsight, it looked obvious that, I mean, obviously we were saying that Trump was going to win, but in hindsight, it looks obvious that Trump was going to win.
Yes. It was almost as if the lie around Joe Biden's fitness for office extended to Harris. Everyone was sort of making out that she was a better politician than she was. She was the kind of like least popular vice president in recent memory.
Well, I think it did do something to neutralise. So the Democrats by the end fell back on the campaign being you can't vote for Trump because of his character, abortion rights, and also this idea that Trump was a threat to democracy. Now, I think that sort of central plank of the Democrats' campaign was hugely undermined by the fact that lots of voters actually thought the threat to democracy was happening under the Democrats by the end because of what was going on around Joe Biden's age and because of what they weren't being told about it.
And quick question to finish. When it comes to a right-wing politician in this country trying to emulate Trump, who is most likely in your mind at the moment, looking at all the figures, to be successful? Farage or Badenoch?
It's a good question. I think it depends which direction Badenoch chooses to go. I think the best way for Conservatives to think about the threat to reform is not to think of it on a left-right spectrum, but to think of it as a question of authenticity and that challenge to the establishment. If Kemi Badenoch can mount that, then it's hers. But otherwise, I think it looks like Farage.
All right. Scarlett Maguire, thank you very much indeed for your expertise, as ever. Coming up next, I sat down with Sir Jacob and Lady Rees-Moggs earlier this week to talk about their new reality TV show. That's coming up next. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
A Jaguar has ditched its growling big cat logo as part of what can only be described as a woke rebrand. The badge that has been used for decades, look at it, beautiful, on the bonnets of luxury cars has been swapped for a curved geometric J badge. They've also released a brand new advert, look at it, for their rebrand, which prompted Elon Musk to ask if the company actually sold cars. I thought this was a wind-up. It's not. It's true. Joining me now to discuss this is the motoring journalist Amanda Stratton. Amanda, what on earth is going on at Jaguar? The car of James Bond, Batman, Arthur Daley has gone off the scale woke. Please make me make sense of it.
The E-Type is an absolutely iconic car, and it's important that people remember that, in fact, in its heyday, Jaguar was an incredibly prestigious brand, more so really than other British brands like Aston Martin, for example. You know, people in the industry are left sort of scratching their heads because you need to do something bold, you need to do something that catches people's attention, but you also need to stay true to who you are and what you are, and I'm not sure that this is it.
Amanda, that could be an advert for anything. It could be cat food. It could be Karl Lagerfeld. It could be literally anything apart from a Jag. Well, I mean, honestly, I mean, OK, we're talking about it. So we are talking about it, but we're not talking about it for the right reasons, are we?
And I think if I was going to be speculative here, I would like to think that this is actually all part of a cunning plan to get everybody talking about it. Yeah. So when they do launch the first new car that we're going to see, which, you know, people have been waiting, as I say, since 2001.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Now, many of you may have thought this in the past. What must it be like to live with Jacob Rees-Mogg? To live a Mogg lifestyle? Well, a reality show is going to reveal all. It starts tomorrow night. And I decided it would be a good idea to invite Sir Jacob and his lovely wife, Lady Rees-Mogg, also known as Helena, into the studio earlier this week, just to discuss, well, why they decided to let the cameras into their home to film them and their 6 children while he was facing the electoral fight of his life, but also, as well as talking about the documentary show, to ask him what he makes of the future of the Conservative Party. This is what they told me. Sir Jacob and Lady Rees-Mogg join me now in the GB News studio to discuss their new reality TV show, Meet the Moggs. Helena.
Yes.
You're the mother of 6 here, you're the wife, you're usually in the background. Wasn't it very risky to agree to let a camera crew into your lives for 6 months?
Yes, it was.
And are you happy with the results?
Not as bad as feared, I would say. Yes, we have seen all 5 episodes, and Discovery Plus kindly showed them to us when they were sort of nearly finished as they went along, and I hope it's not a complete train crash.
It initially started as a project that was going to look at your political life. You had no idea the election was going to be called when it was. I'd imagine that when it was pitched, you probably didn't think you'd appear in it that much. And not the kids either, perhaps.
I think at some point I was told it was going to be 85% Jacob and just 15% the rest of us. I haven't actually sat down with any kind of timer and worked out what it is. It feels like rather more than 15% of the children and me, though. But there we are. Yes, it was all going to be probably quite political, and Jacob in perhaps Parliament, surgeries, life of an MP, and then we assumed perhaps the election would be called in October, perhaps at the Conservative Party conference, and perhaps there'd be a general election in November or December. Would he keep his seat? Wouldn't he? Cliffhanger. And then suddenly, bang, the starting gun was fired for the general election on Wednesday, the 22nd of May, and they sort of ring you up and said, can we come round today and start filming? And Jacob may have said, but we haven't signed anything yet. And I think they said, well, we won't do you over. It's kind of now or never.
Yes.
And so I got home from school and there they were.
There they were. And Jacob, quite exposing for you, because you knew you were in a precarious position as soon as Rishi Sunak appeared in his rain-soaked suit in Downing Street. So you probably had in the back of your mind that they were going to be filming you in defeat rather than victory.
Well, I was going to be filmed in defeat by somebody anyway. I mean, I didn't think I could get away with it quietly. And I had the monster raving loony man standing next to me dressed as a baked bean.
Yes, great fun.
God, I love British democracy.
When you watch episode 1 and 2, I think there's a sense that you're still being quite cheerful about your prospects, but that you, as Jacob's wife, know deep down that it's looking grim. From the very beginning, as soon as the starting gun is fired, or gone, I should say, you look as if you know deep down that he's not winning that seat.
I was still hopeful, but as I think I said at some point, optimistic would have been seriously pushing it. The polls, I think all the polls showed that Labour were going to take that seat back from the Conservatives, apart from about 2 polls, one of which Annunziata found somewhere.
Jacob's sister.
Possibly down the back of her sofa or something.
Yes.
Other than about 2 polls, yes, nearly all of them showed the Conservatives losing the seat. So we were, I guess, being realistic. But of course, you still have to campaign.
Yes.
We did with as much energy and enthusiasm and conviction as possible.
How hurtful was it? I mean, people always say, don't they, that political lives never end well.
Well, it was Enoch Powell's comment, all political careers end in failure unless cut off prematurely.
What was it upsetting for you to lose that seat? I mean, I know you were well prepared.
I was well prepared. I knew it was coming. The Tories were being washed out. There's nothing you can do. And I was very lucky because, unlike many MPs, I had a job to come into on Monday evening at GB News. So I didn't find that I'd lost the seat and then had nothing to do. I actually had quite a lot to do, and therefore the momentum of life was maintained. So, no, it was expected. It became completely obvious once the election was called. I wrote to my boarding school children to say I will lose the election, to warn them pretty much the day it was called or the day after.
And do you think it would have made a difference if it was called for later in the year? I mean, do you blame Rishi Sunak, either of you?
I certainly don't blame him. I think he's a very decent, highly intelligent man, but he unquestionably made a mistake in calling it early. Little things were getting a little bit better. We might have seen a little bit more of the Labour Party, which has been a disaster in government. Interest rates have come down a bit. I think time was on our side, and the early election maximised the damage. And of course, Nigel Farage would have been in America had we had it in early November. So there are all sorts of opportunities that were missed.
Can I just move on to domestic politics and ask you both what you think the future for the Conservative Party holds? Because you've seen it from the inside for quite a large proportion of your married life. We've got Kemi Badenoch now. You've mentioned Nigel Farage, our colleague on this channel, sort of, I think, gaining momentum, frankly, since the last general election. Do you think the Tories have a future, Helena?
I do, though perhaps that's because I'm a natural optimist, but Jacob and I are both still members of the Conservative Party. And yes, I think they do. I think Kemi's absolutely great. She has a lovely speaking voice. Every time she says something, I always think I want to hear more from her rather than less, which is a good start. And no, I think ultimately all will be well for the Conservatives, but obviously they've probably got 5 years in opposition, at least perhaps, or
maybe more.
Maybe more.
I doubt it. The Labour Party is doing so badly.
Well, but the threat from reform, we've had the immigration figures out this week. There is a lack of credibility about the Tories complaining about those figures, to be perfectly honest, and the public can see it. Jacob, you were more of a Robert Jenrick man. He offered you the party chairmanship had he won. Has Badenoch offered you anything?
No, and I wouldn't have expected her to. But as Hannah was saying, Kemi has great strength. She is an extremely charismatic leader. She's very forthright. She made an important speech yesterday on migration, that the migration tightenings that were coming in weren't introduced at the beginning of last year. They were introduced over halfway through. So you do see some fall off in dependents coming, but you don't see the full effect of those tightenings, which will come through. But yes, we bungled it on migration. That was part of the reason we lost the election. And she's setting out her stall for how we deal with this. But you're absolutely right. We need to win the votes back from Nigel, because that's where our vote went. It stayed at home or it went to Nigel. It didn't go to the Labour Party.
It's interesting that he said in the week, actually, at the Reform press conference, that what the Conservatives need to do is half of them need to join Reform and the other half need to join the Liberal Democrats. And that's it. So we can probably still agree that the party is to an extent facing an existential crisis. It really needs to have everything back together. CCHQ arguably needs to be completely reformed moving forward. We've seen Dame Andrea Jenkins defect to reform. I'm not even going to ask you if you'd ever defect to reform, because I know the answer to that is no. But what are your hopes for re-entering the Tory party in some capacity? Would you, for instance, be lobbying for a by-election seat should one come available?
Oh, well, slightly wait and see what happens, what comes up, where the by-elections may be. I think Nigel's analysis is very interesting. I think there are people within the Tory party who became MPs under David Cameron's approach who are more coalition MPs than they are Conservative MPs. Our vote didn't go in that direction. The Conservative Party's problem was not being Conservative enough, and we need to understand that. But there's a huge opportunity, because between now and the election, if we'd have a chance of winning it, we need to select 250 candidates or thereabouts in winnable seats. And that means you can shift the dynamic of the party to where our members are. I address lots of Conservative associations, and all the Conservative associations I speak to are overwhelmingly Conservative. They're not the soggy coalition type Tory wet that David Cameron was so keen on.
Helen, a final question to you. People perhaps have a misconception of who the Rees-Moggs are, so that you're very entitled and posh and perhaps disconnected from the public. However, I think that the reality show shows basically a normal family that most people can relate to, regardless of their class, wealth or background. Is that something that you're glad has sort of shown you in a good light, in a positive light, and the children and Jacob himself?
If that is the case, then I would be absolutely delighted. Obviously, I spent 6 months trying not to come across as a complete berg. And of course, I was concerned that, goodness knows, how we would come across our houses, lifestyle. So if any of us come across well or better than expected, that's great.
So a Series T on the cards then?
Well, let's see how Series 1 is received.
I think that's probably a good place to leave it. So Jacob and Lady Rees-Mogg, thank you very much for joining me on my show today.
Thank you very much for having us on.
Well, to be honest, a thoroughly likeable couple, and I don't just say that because one of them is my colleague. Much misunderstood, the Rees-Moggs, and more will be revealed about them with that reality show. Well, that's me done for another day. Thank you very much to all of my guests for joining me on the Camilla Tominey show this week. Of course, don't go anywhere, because you know what's coming up next. 11 o'clock, it's Michael Portillo. I'll be back next week doing it all again at 9:30. Hope you get your Christmas decorations up by the end of this weekend. If you can, have a lovely rest of your Sunday.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So some sunny spells and blustery showers on the way for many of us today, but it is going to be turning colder as we head in towards the new working week. That's all thanks to this cold front that's sinking its way south and eastwards over the next few hours or so, bringing us northerly winds, particularly across the northern half of the UK into the start of Monday, but those spreading southwards through the rest of the week. Back to the rest of Sunday though. Plenty of showers around, particularly across western areas. These likely to turn heavy across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. But the further south and further east you are, there should be some sunshine as we head through the afternoon. And it will still be feeling mild for the time of year. Temperatures in the south perhaps around 15 or 16 degrees. And even across parts of Scotland, we could see 12 or 13 degrees. So well above average for the time of year. Through the rest of Sunday evening, those showers do continue. This band of showers across parts of Scotland could turn particularly heavy as we go through into this evening. And there'll be plenty of showers pushing in across northern and western areas into this evening as well. Across Northern Ireland, a pretty similar picture. Plenty of showers in the west, but staying a little bit drier for a time further east. Across parts of Wales, southwest England, those blustery showers pushing up on that southwesterly breeze, but eastern parts of England perhaps just staying that little bit drier in towards this evening. Overnight, those showers continue to push their way eastwards, so almost anywhere seeing a bit of wet weather into the early hours of Monday morning. But across parts of Scotland, we'll see those showers starting to turn increasingly to sleet and snow, particularly over any high ground as we go into the start of Monday. And it'll be a chillier night for most of us, perhaps some frost across parts of Scotland, and even further south, temperatures dropping to around 6 or 7 degrees quite widely. Into the start of Monday morning, this band of showers pushes its way southwards across the country, but the further west you are, there should be plenty of sunny spells as we head towards the afternoon, but those sleet and snow showers do continue across the northern parts of Scotland, so that should lead to us feeling a little bit chillier than we've seen recently. Those northerly winds bringing us cooler temperatures around 10 or 11 in the south and around 4 or 5 in the north.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash. We've made loads of winners this year, and you could be our next.
Hi, I'm Angela from Wigan, and I won £30,000 with the Great British Giveaway. It happens to people like me.
For your chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.